So, ladies and gentlemen, my name is Sharon Whiteman, and I'm very proud to be part of and represent the Lyme Disease Association of Australia. And we work very hard to try and affect change in Australia. And one of the ways is to bring some of the world's best speakers to our community. And we're really delighted, so delighted to have Dr. Bill Rawls today. I'll just give you a little bit about his background because I'm sure he'll fill us in further. He graduated from Bowman Gray School of Medicine at Wake Forest University in 1985. He holds his medical license in North Carolina. He's written extensively on health topics, including Lyme disease, fibromyalgia, and chronic immune dysfunction. He's the author of Suffered Long Enough and Unlocking Lyme, and he's contributed to various health sites. Aside from his writing, Dr. Rawls serves as medical director for Vital Plan, a herbal supplement and wellness company he co-founded with his daughter, Braden. So, ladies and gentlemen, thank you for being here. We will have a little bit of chaos and come and go today because people will be coming and leaving. We're all have whatever level of health and capacity that we have, and we all are really good at being patient with each other. The format for today is a Q&A, and that you can either put your hand up. I'd probably prefer everybody mutes for most of the time unless you're speaking. And if you can see at the bottom of your screen, depending on what device you have, there will be a way to raise your hand under the React button. Typically it is for most people. The other thing is, and you can also message me. So you can just send me a chat with your question if you'd prefer that I asked it privately and not highlight. Look, my little Lyme fly was upside down. So, and there's Rose, welcome. So, Dr. Rawls, how would you like to start? Just have an opening and welcome and thank you so very much.
Oh, my pleasure. Yeah. I've already met with a few folks that came on at 6 and I popped on at 6 and we talked for 6 for me. I know it's morning for you. I'm way behind you, of course. But so we did a little bit of just background, but my background is a bit different. I'm not a classic Lyme doctor. I have been studying this thing we call chronic Lyme disease for 20 years. And I have come to a different point of view than a lot of folks out there. Part of that is from my own journey. Got a little echoing there.
Okay, we'll need everybody to mute until you.
Yeah. It's but part of that is my own journey just sent me down a different direction. I was a conventionally trained physician. I got sick after practicing obstetrics and gynecology for 20 years and just not sleeping essentially for 20 years and being totally stressed. Crashed in my late 40s. Um, Struggled with a diagnosis of fibromyalgia or whatever else that might fit for a while. Kept searching and found that I was carrying the Lyme bacteria. Thought that was the answer. Took antibiotics, got sicker, and found myself in a situation where I really didn't have the resources to go and search out other specialists, Lyme doctors, integrative doctors, that sort of thing. And just by default, now I consider it an act of fate. I used herbal therapy and over a 5 year period got my health back completely and have been helping people do the same ever since. Thousands of people. I've come to appreciate that antibiotics and most of the therapies being used by the Lyme literate community actually do more harm than good for most individuals. And that is well documented in both the scientific literature and throughout the internet. And so to really understand how to solve this problem, you have to understand the nature of the bacteria and other microbes like it, the co-infections. So, I'll open it up to questions, and I'm sure we will touch on all of those different topics.
Awesome. And I know we've had some comments and some feedback coming back to us too now. And, while we're going to be talking with Dr. Rawls and his experience and herbal pathway, which really resonates with me, please trust yourself and trust your treating practitioner. Just use this to build on knowledge. And, one patient came to me last week and said, there's no one right way. There's no one pathway. And actually, maybe that could be our first question, Dr. Rawls. So this patient came to me, indicating that we're going to be talking that this is a herbal only pathway. And she says there's no one pathway, but I think it's broader than that, isn't it, Dr. Rawls?
It is broader, but there are certain things that must happen, and I am sure of that. And so the group at six earlier this evening got a little preview of that. But I think the place to start is really understanding the nature of these bacteria. And it took me a long time and a lot of research to get to the bottom of this. But over the past 5 years, I've accumulated a great deal of evidence that supports this particular point of view. Um, and so you really have to think about that. And I think a problem is that we tend to look at all pathogens as basically the same. A pathogen is a microbe, virus, bacteria, protozoa, whatever is trying to get in our body and make us sick. And that's not the right way to think about that. What the microbes are trying to do is survive. And the things that we come in contact that threaten our existence are host dependent. They must have a living host to survive. They get nutrients, they get resources and everything they need to survive from us. And there are lots of different ways that microbes have a relationship with us as a host. And that varies from microbe to microbe. So when you have a really aggressive pathogen, that microbe is not necessarily it's not necessarily a well-balanced host microbe relationship that the microbe is going to win any more than the host. So the microbes that do the very best are the microbes that have a very well balanced host microbe relationship. And that is most of our normal flora. It's a well balanced relationship that they benefit and we benefit too. At the opposite end of that scale is something like Ebola virus that we have no defenses against that microbe. It enters the body and it ravages the whole body. And it survives by spreading very, very rapidly, but because people get so quick, so quickly and die, it burns out. So when you look at different microbes, that's the strategy is really important. And how we try to manage that situation is important also. So, a common bacteria that I use as an example is Streptococcus, strep pneumonia. If you get a virus and on top of that you pick up strep, pneumococcal pneumonia, you can get sick very rapidly because that bacteria is growing very fast. It's very aggressive. It's turning over very, very rapidly. And it's doubling time. The time for it to double the amount of bacteria is 20 minutes. And what that means is somebody can get really sick really fast. Well, that growth, that fast growth, is a prerequisite to antibiotics working well. The faster the growth, the better that antibiotics are going to work. So somebody gets a streptococcal pneumonia, you give an injection of an antibiotic, within days to a week, they're back to normal. So it takes down that bacteria very quickly. Borrelia uses two primary mechanisms of persisting in the body. So its mission is not making us sick. Its mission is persisting. That's all it wants to do is persist. And it doesn't necessarily have to make us sick to do that. So it grows very, very slowly. So Streptococcus doubles every 20 minutes. Borrelia doubles every 12 to 24 hours. Really slow. That's slower than all the normal flora in our gut. It's really slow. So that makes it not only resistant to antibiotics, but it also makes it less of a target to the immune system. If you grow this really slowly, the immune system doesn't necessarily notice you as much. But slow applies to the growth, not how fast it can move. So that spirochete is very fast. So when it enters the body through a tick bite, it courses through the bloodstream very rapidly and penetrates tissues, our brain, our heart, our joints, everywhere. So it's moving fast to bypass the immune system, so it's less of a target. And when it enters tissues, it invades cells. So this is really important. It has the capability now, and it can exist outside cells just fine, and it can invade tissues and break down cartilage, but it invades cells. And it does that to protect itself. It's a survival mechanism. So slow growth is a survival mechanism. Invading cells is a survival mechanisms, and it does this immediately. So it invades cells throughout the body. Now, cells offer refuge from the immune system, but also nutrients and the things it needs to survive. If that cell is healthy, though, it can go dormant inside the cell. Just stop growing, slow its growth. And the cell keeps right on working. The bacteria just is there indefinitely. And if you can imagine this after a tick bite happening throughout your body. So symptoms occur when cells are actually damaged. So during that initial part of the infection, when the microbe is invading cells, some cells are damaged and we become symptomatic. But as the immune system clears active bacteria, then all the symptoms go away. And what I've found is a lot of people who identify with chronic Lyme never develop bad symptoms. I didn't when they got the tick bite. About 90% of the people I've talked to fall into that category. So you can contract the bacteria, it can invade your cells, it can go dormant and not make you sick. And it creates a reservoir that allows it to survive inside your body. So everything is fine until the cells containing the microbes and the cells throughout your body become stressed, and then it reactivates and starts breaking down that cell and emerges and invades other cells. And that's when symptoms start occurring. So typically, not everybody, but very typically, what I find is people get sick as their body gets more and more stressed. And aging is a factor also. As we age, our cells are weakened. When the cells are weakened, the microbes reactivate, invade tissues. And that can come and go. That's why the symptoms kind of go here and there and all over and up and down for years often. But people reach what I call a boiling point that microbe reactivation is driving more cellular damage, is driving more cellular stress, which is driving more microbe reactivation, and this starts happening throughout the body. And that's what chronic Lyme disease is. But the evidence I'm accumulating suggests that that's what all illnesses are to some degree. Different microbes, different cells invaded, same mechanisms though. So, because when you go outside Borrelia and let's talk about Babesia. Babesia is a protozoa. It's often compared to malaria. Malaria is very explosive in its growth. Babesia grows at a snail's pace. Its mechanism of defense or survival is growing very slowly. That's why it doesn't respond to antimalarials like malaria does, because it grows so slow. It invades cells. Bartonella, slow growth, invades cells. Mycoplasma, chlamydia, toxoplasma, Anaplasma, Rickettsia. I mean, the list just goes on and on. These all use slow growth and intracellular dormancy as a mechanism of survival. Dormancy is a really popular strategy around microbes. 60% at any given point in time, 60% of the microbes on Earth are in a dormant state. It works really well. A lot of microbes use it. And it's not surprising that we would find it here. So when you look at that, bombing the microbes with antibiotics, ozone, hyperthermia, whatever you want to hit them, it's going to kill the active microbes, but it doesn't kill that reservoir. So as soon as you stop the therapy, sooner or later it comes back again. But you're weaker because the therapies actually make your cells sicker and weaker. So that's why herbal therapy, no matter what else you're thinking about, it's just a really important foundation. The problem with antibiotics is that you have a window of time that you can use them. So antibiotics are single chemical agents that hit bacteria or viruses or whatever the antimicrobial is, it hits them in one specific place. So, but it also hits our gut flora. So you've got about 10 days before you start wrecking your gut and using an antibiotic. All it takes is 10 days to do long-term damage to your gut. Within 10 days, you start generating antibiotic resistant pathogens in your body, in your gut, within 10 days. And that can be even worse than the Lyme bacteria. We look at chronic Lyme disease. How many people does it kill a year? People get sick, they eventually die of other things, but it doesn't kill them. Antibiotic resistant pathogens now kill more than 1 million people every year, and that's been happening since the 1990s. And every time anybody makes a decision to do antibiotics for 3 months, 6 months, whatever, they're contributing to that very massive problem. So antibiotics are a big issue. So, yeah, I would have to say that the herbs really should be front and center, but it's not just herbs, it is restoring cellular health. That's the ultimate solution. No matter what you do, restoring cellular health is the answer. Because once you restore cellular health, you restore the ability of the body to keep those microbes contained. I don't think we clear the reservoir. And the deeper I go with understanding that, is there are a lot of microbes that are in our tissues that we just don't know about yet. Some of them may actually be beneficial, but it's a lot more. It takes a long time to accumulate that data because we don't cut up healthy people and look in their cells to figure out, what they've got living there. So it's taken a long time to accumulate that data and start putting this together. But there are literally hundreds of studies, little pieces of evidence that support this. Um, so that's in a nutshell how I look at chronic Lyme disease. And I think it is really a good foundation for a discussion to move from there.
Awesome, Dr. Rawls. I can remember when we had on the first recording, which some people may have had the opportunity to listen to, that is just mind blowing to me to look at things in a different way and to have open a whole new world for people of really of hope where they can move forward and have a lot of autonomy and partnership in their treatment pathway. So we're probably not going to be able to get all these questions in a logical order. So let's just go one at a time as they arrive. Um,
Sure.
um, in regard, so we're started looking at treatment and the longevity and the sort of the pathology of how microbes affect us. What in regards to diagnosis and testing. Now, it's such a minefield. And for me, and with a bit of a Lyme brain, it's a moving target because it's progressing quite rapidly in different kinds of testings. And there's people marketing and educating about testing, and this is the best and this is the best why. How can you help us determine the answers for ourselves on testing? Like, is it essential? Um, I know many people, you can help them with a diagnostic or a clinic, like a questionnaire type diagnosis. So looking at their clinical presentation. But I was really helping a gentleman a couple months ago, and he felt so much better when he got a test back that had a positive. Like that, the way we're trained in Western medicine, that's much more
Yeah.
validating than looking at a question mark. So how can you help us with that?
Yeah. Um, I think the simple answer, I'll go into more depth, but the simple answer is asking the question, do you have to have a Lyme test to overcome that chronic illness? And the answer is no, not at all. Um, and I battle with this one myself because I do not want to impede progress by giving people bad information or limited information. But there are a lot of different dynamics going on in testing. So first of all, virtually all of testing is defined and virtually microbe testing, but this is applies to a lot of different kinds of testing. The purpose of testing is to define therapy for acute intervention. So if someone has a new onset infection and they're getting sicker, then having the right test can be valuable. So I think the more we know with microbe testing, the better we are at diagnosing acute infections. Um, I've worked in the ER. I've certainly talked to a lot of emergency room physicians, and when you look at what how they deal with it in the emergency room, there's something called a fever of unknown origin. Somebody comes in and they've obviously got an infection, and the vast majority of the time, they have no idea what it is because there's so many possibilities that we just don't have enough tests. And that's true with tick-borne microbes. I mean, think about it this way. 50 years ago, there was no such thing as Lyme disease. And then we had Borrelia burgdorferi. So we had a microbe that caused Lyme disease. But wait, there's more. We're finding that the Europeans have different ones, and Australia probably has different ones still. And as time has gone on, we're now up to 21 different species of Borrelia that can cause Lyme disease. And it changes every year. But wait, there's more. They're co-infections. And we had first a couple of species of Bartonella, but then more. And now up to over a dozen species of Bartonella and even more species of Babesia. And it changes every year and every year and every year. So the problem with testing is that someone with a negative test gets excluded. And that's the problem. Yes, having a positive test is reassuring. It says it verifies what's going on in your body, or at least what you think is going on in your body. And it's a passport to be able to get into a provider. Um, but it can get you the wrong kinds of therapies that can make you really sick too. So testing is a mixed bag to be in short. And the other side of it, and something that I've seen in the United States is, as people got desperate and Lyme doctors started treating people with antibiotics, people got that would really get desperate for a test. And they were willing to pay a lot of money for a test to get that passport, to get that verification. And labs started popping up all over the country, quite willing to give that that test, that positive test. And what they were in the market for was giving people positive tests. And that's why they were doing a better job than the other labs, is because they were giving out more positive tests. Well, what they were doing was they were raising their indicators such that they had a higher probability of a positive test. But the trade-off is they got a lot of false positives too. That was okay. I still got my positive test. So most many Lyme doctors will tell you that chronic Lyme disease is a diagnosis of it's a clinical diagnosis that you don't necessarily need a test. But from where I'm sitting, you just looking at all these microbes and all of these things, and the fact is, if something's dormant in your system or not particularly active, you're not going to see it. If we were able to look in the tissues of everybody that lived in New England and the United States, I would dare say that probably close to 90% of them we'd find Borrelia or some tick-borne microbe. So I think there's a lot of things hidden in tissues, and it depends on how active they are. So where you're going to get the highest probability of a positive test is right after an infection. Within a few weeks after the infection, when the bacteria is coursing through the bloodstream and the immune system's reaction is at its peak. By the time this becomes chronic, that you have these reactivation episodes, the immune system's reaction is different, and the level of microbes in the bloodstream is going to vary widely. So it's really hit or miss whether somebody's going to get a positive test at all. So it's truly it's a mixed bag, and there's just so many possibilities out there. The advantage of herbal therapy is with broad spectrum herbs, when you're using multiple different herbs, you can cover for a lot of different possibilities. And again, herbs work pretty good for these microbes because they aren't super aggressive. They're slow growing. The herbal therapy is suppressive. That's why it takes so long, is you have to suppress the growth of the microbes. You basically have to wear them down. And to do that, you've got to have something that you can apply pressure without disrupting the gut, without generating resistant pathogens, and without disrupting cellular and mitochondrial health. And you've got to be able to do that for years. And if you're doing it with broad spectrum herbs, you're covering enough possibilities that testing becomes a little less relevant and pertinent. So
Thank you.
does that make sense?
Yeah, yeah, it does. I mean, and you can't really, there are so many nuances of all the different types of tests that are available, but the rationale around testing and it's complete, whether it's a good test or a bad test, really makes sense in that we need to progress based on clinical situation. Now, there's quite a few questions here, but how about if we go to the one about acute tick bite before we go back into chronic
Sure.
situations? So
Yeah,
what's
I was just looking
did you
at your
say that
question,
one?
Marie.
Yeah.
Sure. Yeah, it's it is slow growing even when it first enters the body. That has been documented. I mean, studies go back all the way back to the 80s and 90s documenting slow growth of this bacteria. Um, and do antibiotics kill it? Well, all the infectious disease experts say yes. You take doxycycline, it wipes it, eradicates from the body. But you look at that slow growth and you go, no way. And the fact that 20% of people that are treated with antibiotics get post-Lyme disease syndrome, post-treatment Lyme disease syndrome, I would say, at least part of the time antibiotics don't get it. And maybe it's a lot higher than that. And some people just don't get sick. They may still have it in their tissues. So my protocol is, I don't want to go against the recommendations of our Centers for Diseases Control. So I think people should do the antibiotics. But I always encourage people to do several months of herbal therapy on top of that. But here's the biggest reason to take antibiotics. And I don't know what the situation is in Australia, but here we have the bacteria that causes Rocky Mountain spotted fever called rickettsia. And rickettsia has a lot more potential to do harm than Borrelia. And you would say, well, it's because it's a lot more aggressive. That's not it. It's because of the cells that it invades. So different microbes invade different cells in the body. So Borrelia has preference for nerve cells, muscle cells, cells chondrocytes that produce that rearrange our joints. It's actually been, I actually found a study that it invades oligodendrocytes, the cells that line that insulate our nerves, can go dormant and then reactivate later and scavenge the myelin. And a lot of people with MS test positive for Borrelia. It's not surprising. But rickettsia invades the cells that line small arterioles. And because of that, it's not any faster growing, but because it invades those small cells, if you get anything of a significant infection, then it can cause constriction of blood flow to organs and fingers and toes, which can be really bad. And that's why it causes that rash, because it blocks small blood vessels and people get a rash from that. So rickettsia is is a really good reason to take the antibiotics because it will cut down on that load of rickettsia, and it doesn't always clear it completely, but it can cut down a load enough that if someone has enough of a load of the bacteria or their health is such that it allows the bacteria to proliferate, it might save their organs and their tissues. So that is a reason by itself. And here, somebody gets a tick bite. The protocol is not get a test and wait for the test before you get treatment. The protocol is if you have somebody who has a rash or other kinds of symptoms after a tick bite, they should get antibiotics before you do any testing because you don't know what you've got and it takes a long time to get the test back. So, and if the test is wrong and you got rickettsia, you could be in trouble. So, so there is some sense behind using antibiotics with that acute infection.
Concurrent with herbs.
And yeah, and I think the herbs are also reasonable. The herbs have good activity against rickettsia too.
And so, do you have a recommended protocol for acute tick bite with a herbal regime?
Um, Yeah, it's generally I recommend our products, either Advanced Biotic or Biome Boost. Either one will work, and just do the daily dose for 2 to 3 months and longer if you become symptomatic chronically. But yeah, we've had good results with that. I mean, I've had quite a number of people who got a tick bite, took antibiotics, became symptomatic after the antibiotics, took the herbs for several months and cleared it, and are then were fine. So, I don't have a formal study, but we do have some definite cases that we've seen that happen over and over.
Awesome. So, there's another question, again, that might be in slightly logical order, that came private to me, but getting started. The question is, should we start with a heavy metal detox and a parasite detox and then treat Lyme? Is there a formula for progression of treatment?
Yeah, everybody's got all this stuff down. This marketing hype. I mean, it really is. It's ridiculous. It's you know, parasite cleanses. So What's the how bad is the average parasite burden for most people in Australia?
Don't know.
Yeah, it's probably not much.
What about for Lyme
It's
patients?
when it actually comes down to it, this thing of parasites. So parasites are scary. Everybody just it just brings chills to think that you might have worms crawling around inside of you. And it's but the fact of the matter is humans in the developed world carry a lower burden of parasites, intestinal worms, than ever before in human history. And it's because of this. So when you look at single cell protozoa, bacteria, viruses, they reproduce by division inside the body. They can just divide and keep growing and keep growing and keep growing. But a parasite, a worm, is a multicellular organism, which means it has to reproduce sexually, it has to mate with another one, and it produces eggs which hatch into larvae, which have to go back through a cycle. That typically doesn't happen within the host. So, in other words, if you get a parasite, if you get a worm, it sheds eggs, the eggs hatch into larvae out in the environment, and then it has to be for you to get another load of parasites, it has to be re-inoculated into your system. You have to have fecal contamination of your food and water. In a third world country, that happens a lot. When somebody's got their latrine right back outside, or they're not using a latrine and it's near the water source, you have that cycle continually. So people get constantly re-inoculated. We are not having that in developed countries. Our food is pretty clean. We cook our food. Our water is clean. We're not getting a continual load. Now, that's not to say that we don't get occasional larvae and eggs on fresh vegetables, or there's certain things that you can pick up walking out in the yard in the grass. But it's not a heavy load. We do pick up some things. And in fact, having some things is really important. And here's an interesting bit of evidence. So I found evidence that one factor that may be associated with our increase in mast cell activation syndrome, is the fact that we have a low burden of helminths, roundworms, because having a certain amount of helminths is really important for the immune regulator for the immune system. And if you don't have it, you tend to be more allergic to things. It's a really fascinating study. So, not say we don't pick up some things, and people who are chronically ill are going to retain those things and they are going to be more of a problem, which is why I recommend, everybody on our program, I have them cook their food. I have them wear shoes outside. We don't want new parasites coming in. Um, we would like to get that back to a more normal state. But all of the herbs that I'm using have a history of suppression of parasites. So it will help wear them down. It basically makes the life of the parasite that is in you die off quicker. So it makes it shorter. So herbs do have anti-parasitic properties. It's not as strong as a drug, but it will wear them down if you happen to have some. So I think, I think you have to think differently about parasites and look for just a comprehensive protocol for restoring health. Another interesting thing that I found about parasites, this was a study done in a third world, that they found that people who had really poor health habits had higher loads of parasites than people who had really good health habits and were younger. So even though they were all exposed to exactly the same amount, or they all had the same exposure, people who had really good, great health habits had a much lower load of parasites. So, so that's an important part of all the things too. Detoxification protocols and heavy metals and all of that. First of all, we are exposed to higher levels of toxic substances than humans ever before on Earth. So we are getting affected. But everybody thinks detoxification is a thing, a protocol, a product. It's not.
Um,
If detoxification, if you're chronically ill, the whole process of detoxification is impaired on many levels. So, just starting, where does all the heavy metals come from? Where do you get them?
Dental amalgam would be one.
That's one. That is a place that people with amalgam get some there, but we're seeing it across the population and not just in humans and in animals too. Where does it come from?
Water and soil.
It goes through water and soil, but where does it come from?
I'm going to say the air.
It's in
Industry.
the air,
It'd have to be industry, wouldn't it? Industrial processes and waste.
kind of. Comes from burning coal. All of it comes from burning coal. So, coal is plant matter that was compressed into the earth millions of years ago. And in that process, heavy metals became compacted into the coal. So, when we burn coal for energy, all of that smoke spews out in the environment and it gets in our air, in our water, in our rain. And that comes down on the earth and it gets into small animals, which are eaten by larger animals all the way up the food chain. So the largest animals have the highest concentrations because it concentrates up the food chain. That's why you do see it in tuna and swordfish out in the ocean. It's made its way from the land through the creeks all the way. So it's not that the ocean has higher levels of mercury and everything. It's the animals that have come from the land that make their way out to the ocean and it works its way up the food chain. So where are we? Right at the top of the food chain. So yeah, we do get it. But we're also getting a lot of other petrochemicals from coal and from fossil fuels. And these chemicals are substances that several million years ago would have been healthy for us to consume them. But all that pressure of algae that came to be petroleum, and petroleum has heavy metals in it too, just not to the degree of coal. But those plant substances became compressed and distorted. So they're organic chemicals, they're hydrocarbons, they're organic, but they've been compressed and distorted into consider configurations that no longer support life. Nobody would drink gasoline and think it was a healthy thing to do, right? But it used to be plant matter. So those distorted chemicals are readily absorbed into our body along with the heavy metals, which we pick up and are circulating in our system, and and our cells pick them up. So that's where the problem starts. It starts in our cells. So our cells pick up these abnormal hydrocarbons and these heavy metals in the same way it would pick up nutrients. And they become embedded in our cells. Well, if you're healthy, you purge them pretty easily. So detoxification starts in at the cellular level. Here's where it is impaired. So your tissues are very densely packed with cells. Your muscles, your brain, every tissue in the body, your skin is very densely packed with cells. So you have blood vessels that course through your tissues and fluid containing oxygen and and nutrients circulates out of the bloodstream in that fluid and circulates around the really, really tight spaces around our cells. Our cells depend on that. But that's where our cells purge those toxic substances to get rid of them, to get them out of the body. So what happens is that space has to be clear. So every time a cell dies, it creates debris and congestion that clogs up that space so cells can't get the flow that they need to survive. So it's really important to keep it clear. So the immune system is constantly sending out macrophages to break down that debris. Well, if your cells are being attacked by microbes, if your cells have been weakened by not sleeping and all of these stress factors, plus the toxins on top of that, and you have increased cellular die-off, debris accumulates a lot faster than your immune cells can clean it up, and those spaces become constricted. They become clogged. Cells not only can't get the nutrients and oxygen they need, they can't purge this toxic waste. So it gets stuck. They can't get rid of it. So that's the first place that detoxification is compromised. The solution to that is increasing flow. The solution to pollution is dilution. You got to flush that space. And the best way to do that is exercising. But if your tissues are really inflamed and you can't get out of bed, it's hard to do. So the first thing I recommend for detoxification as part of just a program to overcome the illness is take a sauna. Get in a sauna because sauna increases heat. The heat increases blood flow. And that blood flow, more than getting the toxins out in your sweat, it's increasing blood flow, which is clearing those spaces and flushing that debris and junk into the lymphatic system and back into the bloodstream. From there, it goes to the liver. So once you get this stuff mobilized, it gets to the liver. That's the second bottleneck. So we live in a very, very toxic world, and our liver cells take a beating. 25% of people in America and probably Australia too have fatty liver disease. As we grow older, our fat cells are replaced, our liver cells are replaced with inert fat cells. We lose our capacity to detoxify. So even if you're pulling stuff out of your cells and mobilizing it, if you don't have the capacity to process it, then it just circulates around in your system. So that's why taking herbs like milk thistle to protect the liver are really important. And it's also why we don't want to pull that stuff out of our system too fast because you're going to overload the liver and actually toxify the liver. That's why things like EDTA and chelation are a really bad idea because you're pulling all this toxic stuff out of your cells and sending it to a compromised liver that doesn't have the capacity to process it. So this has to be gentle. You have to move it slowly. The thing that I like to use is chlorella, because chlorella releases chlorophyll, and the chlorophyll helps pull stuff away and helps detoxify it at the cellular level. So, I think it's really important. Milk thistle, dandelion to protect the liver, get things flowing. Then once you get it to the gut, everybody's out there, oh, you need to take bentonite clay and charcoal and all this stuff. You got to get it out of your body. Bentonite clay and charcoal are notorious for slowing intestinal motility and causing constipation. Most of those things actually have heavy metals in them too. So you got to get it out of your body. So once it is neutralized by the liver, it's going to trickle out through the bile. You got to get your bile flowing again too. Dandelion can really help that. So once it gets into the intestinal tract, it's a trickle. You don't want a big load coming out because if you have, you've messed up a lot of other things too. You want a trickle. And the best thing to bind that trickle and get it out of your body is vegetable fiber. Lots and lots and lots of vegetables. It binds it and it increases motility and it normalizes bowel movement so you get it out. So that's detoxification in a nutshell. And I think, all the products and all the stuff that people are doing is just missing the boat. It's not getting to the heart of the problem. It has to be an integral part of your recovery. Really important. Does that make sense?
Yes. And spirulina, is that an effective?
I'm not a fan of spirulina, and here's why. Chlorella is a true algae, a true algae. It's a eukaryotic plant-like cell. Spirulina is actually a cyanobacteria, and many of those cyanobacteria produce toxic substances. And It's kind of hit or miss. So we know that some spirulina products out there, and it varies, within the same product, carry some toxic substances that have been produced by cyanobacteria, which are notorious for producing toxins. So I like just to keep it safe and just go with chlorella, and chlorella is a really good place, good source of chlorophyll, which is the main thing that's doing the benefit.
Okay, perfect. And then we're probably moving to some chronic treatment questions, but one before that I think is very topical. One of our listeners today had Q fever in the past and was very unwell with it, but was still given the vaccine and then got severely unwell after that and suffered terribly. She was only gaslit by the Q fever specialists. So what is obviously specifically the Q fever vaccine? Is it more dangerous than the initial infection? And what about we have a lot of Lyme community members that are impacted by vaccines and worsened from that. What are your comments on that?
Yeah. I don't know if I'm knowledgeable enough to answer. I'd have to do some research. The answer to the question of how the body reacts after if you've recently had Q fever and then got the vaccine, what that is actually doing in the body. And I'm not an anti-vaxxer by any means, but I do respect that vaccines can cause side effects. And I think one thing that we commonly see with vaccines is a change in immune system functions, but also, a disturbance in the system that can cause depress cellular health. So I think what we're often seeing in a reaction to a vaccine is actually, yeah, a reactivation of not just whatever the vaccine was targeting, but to a lot of other things that people have in their body. I mean, that's one of the things early on I saw with people getting the COVID vaccine is people would reactivate their Lyme disease. And I certainly had that experience myself. I mean, when I was really struggling, I got a flu vaccine and had a terrible relapse for about 6 weeks. So I think, we don't know all the things that are happening, and I think sometimes the scientists are not looking at the possibilities as much as they should. But my theory is that vaccine reactions are often reactivations of other microbes. We've seen this with Epstein-Barr virus and other kinds of things that people reactivate. So I think that's part of it.
Thank you. And so there's a question from earlier on, for people, scanning our attendees today, all of us are chronic for varying levels. I possibly now reconsider that I've been chronic since birth on reflection. So that's 69 years, but I know I got bit by a tick in 2002 and then it was downhill since then. So, I think Andre's question is very valuable. Is there hope for people that have tried herbs, are currently bedridden, in that cycle of hopelessness and that why try again. And I know from when you and I spoke before, you've had that personal experience.
Yeah, I mean, I put a lot of faith on in the herbs, and I I certainly respect that maybe there are some people that aren't going to get full benefit, but I never give up on that. I do think that, sometimes, and this is one of the things that caused us last year to really reevaluate everything we were doing and create a new program, is realizing that a lot of times that herbs aren't working, it's because the body isn't receptive. Everything is in such turmoil. Sympathetic overactivity, the hormones are disrupted so much. Everything in the immune system is out of balance. And if you throw one more thing in, it just upsets the balance even more. So people have a a hard time. And we're having better results with our program that instead of just hitting people hard with some of our stronger herbs right off the beginning, we're starting out very slow with the antimicrobial. I've started calling them antimicrobial adaptogenic herbs. That and and just pardon me, but in the United States, for whatever reason, we say herbs instead of herbs. It's just a habit. I think both are fine. But I, so it's what recovering from chronic illness is creating an environment inside the body that allows cells to recover. So our body, we are cellular organisms, and we don't tend to think about the body like that. We tend to think about, oh, we're parts. We've got skin, and we've got bones, and we've got, we've got a heart and organs. But everything is made of cells, and 90% of our body is cells. The other 10% is, bone material and connective tissue that holds the cells together. But everything that happens in the body is due to the actions of cells. So for the body to function as a unit, all the cells in the body have to be in communication with all the other cells in the body. And that is happening with this network of nerves and hormones and other signaling agents that's constantly changing. And what that's doing is coordinating cellular functions. So if all of our cells are collectively healthy and all of our cells are connected, then we'll feel healthy. We won't have symptoms. We won't have hormone imbalances. All of our labs will be normal and we'll feel great. What good health is normal cellular health. What disease is when that breaks down and our cells are stressed and things become dysfunctional. So when cells are stressed, they can't do their jobs. They become energy deprived. They can't message each other. So communications break down. That's what illness is. So and when you look at an illness, whether you're talking about chronic Lyme, multiple sclerosis, autoimmune illness, I don't care what you're talking about. What a state of illness is cellular stress and dysfunction, and that's typically held in place by these microbes that have reactivated, and then they're in charge and they're driving the show. So part of it is suppressing that microbe activity. And herbs are the only thing I know that can do that without disrupting cellular health in other ways. That's the only thing. But again, starting things out, you have to keep working toward creating an environment inside the body that allows your cells to recover. What healing is the ability of cells to recover from stress and regenerate. That's what healing is. But to do that, you got to take the stress off. So, what our program is all about is first calming the turmoil, the overactive fight or flight response that's going on in the brain that disrupts communications, shuts down detoxification, shuts down the gut. So, that's the first step is gaining that. That's why brain retraining programs often are very effective for a lot of the symptoms of Lyme, because just calming things down and letting cells communicate again really helps out that situation. And we spent a couple of months just on that one thing. And we use herbs like ashwagandha and other calming herbs to help calm those stress hormones. So we short circuit that stress response. And the next thing is then working toward getting a good diet, because if you're not nourishing your cells and you're not restoring gut function, then you're going to lose the battle. Really important. So sleep, calm, restoring gut function, nourishing your cells again. And all that needs to happen before you can really focus on opening up those detoxification pathways and cleaning out all the junk. And then you start doing that. And it's only then that you can start bringing on those stronger herbs to really make that process possible. Along the way, maybe there are some things that you can do that can help that process. Sauna, I already mentioned. Red light therapy can energize cells. So there are some various therapies. I saw someone ask the question about Rife machine. I don't know whether Rife actually kills cells or whether it just energizes cells. But sometimes, energy therapies can be valuable because they energize cells. Cells have more energy. If energy deprived cells have more energy, they have more time, more energy to recover and do their jobs. So energizing cells is really important. So doing that comprehensive thing of focusing on nothing else but creating an environment inside the body that reduces cellular stress and allows cells to recover from stress, that's the pathway. And that's what gives people that are bedridden, that are really stuck, that's what you have to do. You have to keep that in your mind and stop chasing therapies. So before you do any therapy, the first question you should ask is, how much is it going to harm my cells more than anything else? How much is it going to harm my cells? Because if it's going to harm your cells in some way, then you really ought to think twice about it. So there are a lot of things out there. Again, possibly Rife, red light therapy, sauna, maybe hyperbaric oxygen. Those kinds of things can move things forward that in an adjunct to good diet, calming that sympathetic overactivity, restoring normal sleep, cleaning out, opening these detox pathways, nourishing your body and your cells again, and eventually moving into getting more physically active, and then bringing on some stronger herbs to really contain that microbe stress and continue that until the body can take care of the microbes and keep them contained. And that's what it's all about. It takes time, it takes years of concerted effort. Again, it took me 5 years to get that. And I think that's where people give up, if they haven't seen a tremendous response in a few months or even a year, they jump to something else. And it's yeah, so I think you have to think about it in those terms. To me, that is, I mean, it's down to basic laws of the physical universe. I mean, it's that's how the body works, and if you're not doing that, then it's just not going to happen.
And so, Dr. Wells, I mean, obviously, I'm not a doctor and I can't recommend, but one of the things that was really exciting for me about the Vital Plan program is that there's a whole community that's built around it. So that, I think every single person here live today, and I'm sure many hundreds that will listen later, will have that feeling where you're on your own and you don't have enough knowledge to keep going and you think you're doing something wrong, this isn't working, and you quit before you got to the first goal point. So, that whole process of the it's like a something that you're being held in a system where can you help me understand, there's regular touch base, um, there's a community that they can be in and online. So all these kind of questions when you're on your own, which we are here in Australia, explain to how the process is for people that choose the Vital Plan program.
This new program called Restore 180 has been an intense effort by myself and my team over a year to build. And it's, looking back a year or more ago, we had a Facebook group that people could go and exchange information, but we didn't have any control over it. Facebook controlled it, Meta controlled it. And it got to be that it was more about monetizing for Meta than anything else. So, but we had this opportunity to build a community within something called Mighty Networks, which means that it's like a social media network that's a closed group, but we have control over it. And I brought in a moderator, so a person to moderate it who had a long history of she and I had done podcasts together years ago. Her kids were affected, she was affected. She did all the products, followed all the recommendations, and yeah, about 2 years ago, she called me up and said, "I'm cutting out the podcast. I'm going about my life. We're back to normal." And I thought, and it made me sad because I would miss her, but I was happy for her that she had reached that point. So when we put out a call for looking for somebody to moderate this community, she popped up and said, "I want to come back and do that." And it was just awesome. And she has just been wonderful. So she constantly moderates all the feeds and makes sure everything is moving in a positive direction, makes sure that people's questions are answered. And but the community, it gives us a lot more abilities than Facebook ever did. So within the community, I've built lessons. So there's all kinds of lessons, demonstrations. Like the first one, there's lessons about, how to get more sleep. There are relaxation demonstrations. Our staff is really good. Two of our staff are herbalists. We've got a yoga instructor, a qigong instructor. They all have done demonstrations that have gone on there, and we so there's a lot of content. Plus, I built out what I call the resource library that, I keep putting information in, like how do you manage a Herxheimer? How do you manage setbacks and relapses? What do you do about mast cell activation syndrome? What do you do about parasites? All of these things. How do you find a healthcare provider that's going to listen to you? How do you manage that thing? Testing, more information about the microbes. So I'm just continually building more and more and more information into that. Everybody gets a 30-minute health coaching call, and we have group health coaching sessions. I do workshops with folks just on, solving different problems. I see what people want to hear, and we'll do a workshop on it. The health coaches have actually been with us for almost a decade each. We have three health coaches, and they really understand this. They've all walked the walk. They've been there, so they all in their own way understand things differently. So it's a safe space that a lot of people find comfort, and it's it's maybe a little bit more challenging if you're on the other side of the world, but you can still participate in all the conversations. So there's a lot of great information there. I don't know if it grew big enough. I would like to have like our a Restore 180 Australia that had a moderator in Australia that would it would do fill that role. But that's what it's all about. It's creating a safe space where people can find good information, that they can trust, that they can ask questions, that they're going to get good information. And I tell people it doesn't exclude a practitioner. I think everybody should have a practitioner, somebody, but it doesn't necessarily have to be a Lyme literate practitioner. It just has to be a compassionate person that's willing to listen, do testing when it's indicated, write prescriptions when they're indicated, and see you when you really are sick with something, But but it fills in a lot of the gaps that I think health care providers don't fill. So that, and we found that with all that support, people are more apt to have a good response with the products. So I feel very strongly it's been worth the investment that all of us have put into it.
I'm just so you know, I'm involved in a different community that uses Mighty Networks, and they are international, and they've worked out ways to have different sort of pods for the different countries. So that's definitely on track for Mighty Networks as a capacity. Now, there was another question here. So we're just talking about, I want to wrap up with a few questions that are still specific for individuals, but in regards to the Mighty Networks community, there is a fairly reasonable or even a free pathway to enter into that, isn't there, through the Vital Plan?
Yeah, I mean, it's we we can't run a company for nothing.
Yeah.
And so the bigger program by default, we have to pay for, get some revenue from it. The but the we do open up a free session, and Liza is just so good about coming up with stuff. I mean, right in the middle, and if you're interested, you can still sign on. She's put together a boot camp, that's 21 days that's going on right now. It starts in a couple of days, and it's like a mini version of the Restore 180 program. And I spent all last week cutting new videos for it. So there's a lot of excitement about it, and it's free to anybody. So I saw a couple of folks from Australia that have joined. So possibly you're here with us this evening, or for y'all this morning. But that is available, and it's a nice way just to experience and to see what's going on. See if it's a good fit, see if it's something you like.
Yeah, yeah, it's a test, and an introduction, and I'll make sure I'll get my brain working enough to find that link and make it available along with this recording. And so a couple questions around specific. So we've covered chronicity and the persistence it needs and the community and support modes around you in order to be most successful, and also to have to keep going. Like sometimes you need a coach, like, you just take another step or go another week. Beyond that, there's some problems that have been asked. So sleep, is there something, there's questions about THC oil, about there's two different questions about sleep that's very common, that people can't sleep. Do you have a recommendation for that?
Yeah. It's it does take some work. I mean, that was a big issue for me. That's what basically got me into trouble. I had been doing obstetrics, taking a call every second to third night for 20 years, and I lost the ability to sleep, and my body started breaking down. Um, when you look at the sleep that is the sleeplessness that's associated with chronic illness, a big part of it is just that exaggerated fight or flight response, exaggerated cortisol and adrenaline that's happening in your system. So think about it this way. You've got all this turmoil in your body. All of these microbes are attacking your cells. Your cells are stressed. Your cells are damaged. Whenever cells are damaged, they release chemicals that activate nerves that send a signal to the brain that something's wrong. So if you just cut your finger, you feel it as pain. That's what that signal is doing. And you go, oh, I need to put some pressure on that so I don't bleed. So your brain is telling you how to manage that problem. So think about your body in turmoil with every stress cell in your body continually bombarding your brain with distress signals 24/7. It activates that alert response that raises your adrenaline, raises your cortisol, and it blocks sleep. And that becomes self-destructive because sleep is just essential for you to get well. Sleep is when your cells recover. If you're not getting 8 hours of sleep at night, you're starting your next day with a deficit that your cells haven't recovered from the day before. So sleep is essential, and it's just really really frustrating. The only thing that will put you to sleep is a drug like Ambien, which there's probably either that available in Australia or some derivative of it. And I found that because I was desperate, became habituated to it. Um, Out of desperation. It worked for about a year and then it stopped working. And then I said my insomnia got so bad it was unbelievable. And the side effects, the withdrawal symptoms of getting off the drug were worse than any Lyme symptom I ever had. It was horrible. So, if I can help people avoid the drugs, then I certainly do that. But sleep has to be cultivated, and so you have to calm the cellular stress, which takes time. And in the meantime, though, learning to short circuit that stress response. And that's why we use herbs like ashwagandha and other calming herbs that don't have habituating properties like drugs, but they have the effect of basically fooling the brain into thinking it's not quite as bad as it seems, and calming that cortisol and calming the adrenaline. At the same time, brain retraining and relaxation exercises just basically to teach your brain to ignore that stress response so it calms the cortisol and calms the adrenaline. That's what it's all about, is getting that back to normal. But another thing that I've realized too that's a factor is a lot of people have mast cell activation syndrome to some degree. I think we all do. And I think histamine is another factor that keeps us awake. So, quercetin and herbs like that, using to calm the histamine response in the body, which a lot of it is driven by the microbes. I mentioned that parasites may have a response to that, but I think the microbe activity is directly driving the immune response in that respect too. So calming mast cell activation syndrome using herbs and things that we can do that. Brain retraining, again, is really effective for that. And you gradually learn how to sleep again, and you get a little more sleep back, piece by piece by piece by piece, and you gradually are able to sleep again. But it is a process. So, that's a big part of just helping people work through that situation. And, sometimes drugs are a necessity, but if we can help people manage it with minimal drugs and not becoming habituated to the drugs, then I think that's helpful. Or using things that are less. I see THC oil, compared to Ambien, using THC or CBD products is a lot better and is helpful for some people to get sleep again. Me, I had the opposite effect. THC just buzzes me and makes it worse. CBD helped a little bit, not much. I had to do the hard way. But, so finding alternatives that aren't habituating, that can help neutralize, help short circuit that stress response so we can calm that brain and calm our cortisol and adrenaline. That's what you have to do.
And another question in regards to recovery, what if you don't sweat?
Sweating, yeah, that's a big deal. I talked about that with the 6 o'clock group. I didn't sweat either. It's and we talked about it. It probably is partially that disruption of our autonomic nervous system. Part of it is that, but I think a lot of it is when cells are stressed, they have to work harder, they use more energy, and they burn out their mitochondria, so they become de-energized. Another thing beyond not sweating is we all get cold. I mean, I was freezing. I would be freezing in the dead of summer. I mean, I would, everybody that have the air conditioning on in my office, and I used to have a heater in my office. I would have to go warm my hands up before I did exams because I was so cold all the time. My body temperature was low, and it's because your cellular engine, your cells are de-energized, so you're not generating the kind of heat that you normally would. And you have to have heat before your body is going to sweat. So I think a big part of it is just de-energized cells. Our cells are stressed.
Awesome. And I think a final question, the chronic fatigue part of these constellation of infections, does that resolve as you restore cell health or treat the infectious load, or what's your thoughts on the fatiguing aspect?
Yeah. There's a difference in fatigue and not and lower energy, right? So I'm 68 and I wouldn't define myself as having fatigue, but I don't have the stamina and energy capacity that I did when I was 30 or 40. And it's because what aging is, is that we lose functional cells and our cells gradually lose energy. They burn out their mitochondria. That's what aging is in a nutshell. So your peak cellular health is at age 20. You accumulate cells all through childhood. That's why our kids are so vulnerable because they're pumping out so many new cells and everything is happening. It's very dynamic. But once you hit 20, you stabilize. And at that point, you have 5 to 10 times more cells than you need, and all your cells are brand new. By age 40, you've burned through half of your reserves and your cells have half the energy they did at age 20. That's why you just don't see many professional athletes at age 40. Most of them are retiring. By age 80, you half that again. So, so your cells are gradually losing energy. And so we do lose energy and stamina as we age, and that's perfectly normal and not necessarily a bad thing. What fatigue is just feeling like you can't get up out of a chair. And what that is de-energized cells. All right. So I'm 68. I don't have symptoms. And it's because even though my cells have, you know, only a third of the energy that I did when I was younger, I don't have symptoms because my cells are healthy, right? So if you're fatigued, it's because your cells are fatigued. So fatigue, the symptom, any symptom, here's where symptoms are actually a better indicator of your health than any lab you can get. Symptoms are a direct indication of cellular stress and dysfunction in your body. Say that one more time. Symptoms point to the cells that are being stressed. So if you have fatigue, that means widespread cellular stress throughout your body. And we tend to see this a little more with reactivated viruses than we do bacteria. That's why chronic fatigue syndrome tends to be more reactivated Epstein-Barr and other kinds of viruses where I think, fibromyalgia, chronic Lyme tends to be more cellular destruction by bacteria, so we have more pain. Um, but it's de-energized cells. It's cells that are stressed, and and you just your cells don't have the energy to get you going. So the solution is creating an environment inside that reduces cellular stress and allows your cells to recover. That's the only way out.
Thank you, Dr. Rawls. Um, Glycine and SAMe helps nervous system and sleep. Thoughts on them?
Um, it can, yes. So glycine is an amino acid, and it hits your GABA receptors. So it works a little. So our brain and our nervous system are calmed by an amino acid derivative neurotransmitter called GABA, and you need GABA. GABA is constantly being remade, and glycine can act on those same receptors, so it has a calming effect. And you mentioned also which one, what other
SAMe.
one? SAMe. Yeah, SAMe is a precursor to tryptophan, which also can have a calming effect. It's up the line for serotonin, and it also is a really good methyl donator, which can help your cells detoxify and help your liver cells work better. So it's a good one too. Got to get lots of methylators.
So, Dr. Rawls, I think we've this 90 minutes of your time, and um, we've we've been very on top of questions, and I think that I'm sure people will think of more later, but I'd like to wrap it up now. What's in your heart? I mean, God bless you for this, and what's
Trying
in
to
your heart
scan
to
to make
leave
sure I
people?
didn't miss anything. Back
I'm
at the
pretty sure.
front, um, usney is a really nice herb. I like it. It's great for urinary tract and other kinds of things. I don't use it as much for chronic Lyme because I tend to use herbs that we've documented antimicrobial activity against these specific pathogens that we've defined as being active. But it's a great herb, and if you had a response from it, that's great. It is not unusual when you use an herb that over time your body will develop tolerance to it, whether that's the microbes or whether it's your body just breaking it down faster, I don't know. And that's why I recommend that people rotate herbs, and so I think that's a really good thing to do is keep rotating herbs. Um, yeah, let's see. I think I hit most things. So
I tried to
yeah,
get them
it's
all,
good.
but I do have gaps in my brain function. So,
Yeah.
what would you like to leave people with from your heart today?
Um, it's just so important to r- reframe how you're thinking about this illness, and what you'll realize is it's healing comes from within your body, and creating that environment that promotes cellular recovery is what it's all about. And having other people, not being alone, that's really valuable. But people who have been through this journey are often more help. Health coaches are often more help than providers who don't really completely understand what this thing is. And I find that to be true with even a lot of Lyme literate doctors. They don't understand the way these microbes act in the way that I'm presenting them. What I have just shared with you is the result of a tedious effort to think this thing through and gather the evidence to support what I've said. So there's a lot of effort into it. I have literally reviewed hundreds of studies over the past decade. Um, and I'm very confident about what I say, but it's also logical. it fits. When you look at this explanation, it explains the symptoms of chronic Lyme disease. It explains, why certain things work and certain things don't. And so I would suggest that take that into consideration as you move forward in your recovery. And that the more that you take responsibility for your recovery, then the farther you're going to get. And it's all about creating an environment inside your body that restores cellular health. Part of that is suppressing the microbes, but you have to do other things too.
Dr. Rawls, thank you very much. And I know that you've made a difference
Pleasure.
for Australians today and into the future.
Well, thank you for having me. It was a real pleasure.